And we are now over on page 2 of the handout, what to do when there's no time to plan. So this is a situation where mum or dad or a loved one is going into the nursing home right away. We don't have any time to plan. What can we do about this Medicaid spend down that was asked about earlier? Okay, so as I mentioned before, basically Medicaid is for a nursing home. There's some limited at-home assistance, but primarily it's there for the nursing home, which is why if you have insurance, it'll cover independent living or assisted living, a place like this. The insurance will give you more flexibility. And again, don't confuse Medicare with Medicaid. Medicare is for the short hospital stay, a little rehab afterwards. Medicaid is going to pay for the long-term stay. But as I'm sure you're aware, there are strict income as well as assets limitations for Medicaid. We had a question about the house earlier. Generally, the house is exempt as long as there is someone living in it, which is okay for a married couple. But if the house is empty, the house can become an asset later on, or even if the other spouse is living in it, the Medicaid can still put a lien on the house. Yes, sir?
If both parents are, you got a daughter or son living there, and both the parents have to go into the nursing home, what effect of that? Will it take how long the kid is living there?
Well, potentially the house could still have to be sold if both the parents are out, if both the owners are out. Yeah. So initially the home is exempt, the car is exempt, limited prepaid funeral expenses, a small amount of life insurance and household goods, they're all exempt. So what's countable? Well, basically everything else. Your 401k, IRA, savings, CDs, etc. If you own a rental property or a second home, all those things are countable as assets. And it says they're a single person, but that's actually true whether it's a single person or a married couple. This is true. So what's the spend down? Well, Medicaid is administered at the county level. So if you go to Albemarle County, let's say Mr. Jones goes to Albemarle and says to social services, says, I have $100,000, I'd like to apply for Medicaid, please. They say, well, Mr. Jones, as a single person, you spend all your assets down to $2,000. Come back and see us and you'll qualify for Medicaid. Well, let me give you some examples of why although that is true, that is the law, but let me give you some examples as to why Mr. Jones doesn't have to do that. The spend down, that's Mr. Jones spending down his money exempt, and what counts, the house, etc., is exempt. We talked about that. Okay, so let's have an example here of a married couple, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. Between them, they have $219, $120. Let's round it off. Let's say they have $220,000 between them. Well, it's a little easier to plan for a married couple because we can automatically exempt half of it. We can exempt half up to $109,560. So again, round numbers, let's say Mr. Johnson's going into the nursing home. We can set aside $110 for Mrs. Johnson. That's automatically protected. But what about this side? What do we do with this? And again, this is what we call crisis planning. This is where someone's going into their nursing home this week. Well, this type of planning takes a little while. So a month or two, we may have to pay the nursing home while we're making these arrangements. If the Johnsons don't already have their funeral expenses prepaid, now would be a good time to do that because that's exempt. They're driving around in an old car, Mrs. Johnson's afraid about that breaking down. They can purchase a new vehicle because, again, that's exempt. The house is an exempt asset as long as they're in it. So they can fix up the house. The house needs a new roof. Now's a good time to do that because, again, the house can be protected as an exempt asset. Medicaid doesn't look at the debt side of things. So they have a credit card, they have a small mortgage. Now would be a good time to pay off the credit card, pay off the balance on the mortgage, to spend the difference between these two numbers here, to spend the $107,000. So those are all things that they can do rather than just giving the money directly to the nursing home. But what about if, what about you say to me, oh, well, Simon, that's all great, but I don't need a new car, the home doesn't need fixing up, already paid for my funeral, what else can we do?
Hey, Simon, just real quick.
Uh-huh.
How are those assets, or the spend down, how do you get them to count against the individual that's going into the nursing home, or do they come from the spouse's assets as well?
Well, it doesn't really matter with Medicaid. They just look at the total assets regardless of how they're titled. So you can just split it in half, say that's the community half, the community spouse, that's her half. And then with the rest of it, you can spend it in the way that I described, but you don't have to divide the money between the spouses. It's just, it's all considered joint money. Okay, but let's say none of that applies. What else can we do? Well, there is a very special type of annuity, and Adam will tell you that there are many different types of annuities. There are literally thousands of different types of annuities out there. But the one that I'm referring to is a special type of annuity, and again, this is not something that you should try on your own, but to deal with an expert for an immediate annuity, and we're going to purchase that based on Mrs. Johnson's life expectancy. We're going to take the difference between these two figures, the 109 and the 2000. So we're going to purchase this annuity for Mrs. Johnson for $107,560. And in this example, her life expectancy is 10 years. So we divide that number by 10 and then divide it again by 12, and that gives us a monthly payout. So now Mrs. Johnson's going to receive $896 a month, so we've increased her income. But most importantly, this principle, in this particular type of annuity, it's called a Medicaid compliant immediate annuity. In this particular type of annuity, we've protected the principal. And there's no look-back period on this. This is immediate, and the principal's protected. So, just like with the veterans benefits, where the VA tells you can't have more than 40,000, that's not true, and nor is it true that you just have to spend down to 2,000 before you can receive any benefits. Neither one of those are true. Just like you go to see a CPA to help you with your taxes, you can find someone like myself who can help you, with these benefits when the time comes. Okay, so very briefly, we're just going to talk about gifting. The question in the back,